So obviously, I think everybody's familiar with this software company and may have used their software applications. I feel like every single business is using it these days. And so joining us all the way from probably a little bit better weather than us in San Francisco, but please, a warm round of applause to join us to talk about building a delightful enterprise-grade login experience. We've got Mr. Sam Wolfand from Slack.
Hey, how's it going? It's amazing to be here. I was kind of searching for the right way to explain my excitement for being here, and also in the right way to thank sort of the organizers as well. And then we had dinner with them last night, and this happened. So that's the representation of how excited I am to be at AndroidTO. So I want to start with a little game. This is our legacy sign-in experience, and this is our legacy create. Sign-in, create. How many of you can tell the difference? The answer is neither could our users. So that's kind of what I'm here to talk about. I know you might be here for building an enterprise-grade login experience, but I think this title sort of sums up more accurately what I wanted to talk about, which is making a good first impression and why it matters. So same talk, different title. When we went about a year and a half ago, essentially how this talk will work is I'm going to sort of describe the product challenges of revamping our login experience, and also why we did it, and then some of the engineering challenges as well. So about a year and a half ago, we embarked on this journey to rebuild our login experience. And we had a lot of people who were upset that you couldn't log into multiple workspaces at once. We had a lot of dropped analytics. Anytime anything changed, we sort of have a flare on our analytics, which affected our top line, funnel numbers. And there was just a lot of things going wrong. It was old legacy code. It was Java. It was multiple fragments or multiple views. There was animations. It was sort of a mess. So, and I think what we did was we looked at, okay, what do these sign-in and create flows have in common? And I am so sick of the word flow because I've been saying it for the last year and a half pretty much every day. But you'll notice I'll try to avoid it. But so we looked and we saw that the confirm email step is really what they had in common. So we took that and we wanted to invert that, where you're always going to need a confirmed email to authenticate or do the things you want to do in Slack, right? You can't create a team. You can't sign into a workspace without an authenticated email. So if we put that first, we can sort of sweep a lot of things behind it and make things a lot better. The issue with that is that signing in to an enterprise app is pretty confusing. There's SSO. We have something called admins and guests. And if you forget about them, you lock your CTO out of Slack, which definitely happened. And you have something like two-factor authentication. And even more confusing is that you can have multiple email addresses for multiple accounts in Slack. And that really makes things a lot harder because we can't use the niceties that Google supplies, like smart lock or things like that, because we don't have a unique identifier, right? Our unique identifier is the workspace URL and the email combined. We can't use email as a primary key. So before I sort of get into before I sort of dive in a little further, I want to jump through the authentication request flow really quickly, but don't worry about remembering it. So the goal is always to open Slack. And we have sort of the easy case, or where we check if the user has any multi-factor authentication accounts. That's SSO or two-factor auth. And if they don't, we check if they have any standard auth accounts. And if they do, we can open Slack. But there are some pivot points there. If they don't have any multi-factor accounts or standard auth accounts, then we have this thing called pending auth workspaces, which enterprises use. And you need an empty state there and a pending auth screen. And you also, obviously, back at the top, you need to, if they have multiple multi-factor auth accounts, or they don't, if they have multi-factor auth accounts, you need to sign them in somehow. So that's basically how it all works, and then everything has to get back to Slack. So we thought, okay, well, this is a hard problem, but we're engineers. We love solving hard problems. And we came up with some mock-ups and some designs. And one of them notably was this open email app button on the email sent screen, which I noticed after we launched this, a lot of apps actually started copying because it's super convenient and really fun. And we went with sort of a minimal theme. And we had to come up with a new way of being able to log in to your workspaces after you've already logged in once. Like I said, you're going to have multiple emails tied to accounts on Slack. And so we sort of came up with this new Add Workspaces experience from within the app, and we thought that was good. And this is the pending auth and the empty state screens. So we were pretty excited. We had all these designs. We set to work. We launched in December of 2017. We thought users are going to love this. It's so great. And so we shipped it. And this is one of our many fantastic thinking stare emojis. We have literally hundreds. But the issue is that we shipped it. And so you're never really ready for that much negative feedback. But we took this as an opportunity. And that's sort of the crux of all of this, right? We always want to be customer aware. And we're like, OK, well, let's go back and let's look at a North Star. Like, what is our North Star that we can point to if we're going to make this better, like, for real? And we found this statistic, which I love to quote, is that 80% of our users have one account with one email. So we were sort of optimizing for the wrong thing. We thought that like the navigation sprawl of this complicated process was like kind of clouding our vision in terms of what we really wanted to do. We thought it was a really complicated process, and it had an equally complicated login process attached to it. But we looked at it, and we're like, OK, well, how can we make this better? And we sort of rearranged some parts so that we can make it a little bit easier. And the main piece of it was this workspace selection screen. And this allows users to pick and choose which workspaces they want to be a part of, and it sort of sweeps the complexity behind it. And that way, the other important thing to note is this screen on the right is this how we now let you see your pending auth or your multi-factor auth workspaces in your side drawer. And that was really, really key to making this all successful because we didn't have to retrain user behavior. You know, those are your workspaces. They've always been there. They're always going to be there. And so now when you sign in, like, oh, I have all these workspaces I haven't signed into yet. Now you can see them right away. And they're always where the user has always thought they would be. And then on the left is the prompt sign-in screen that I mentioned earlier. The other thing that we saw was that we weren't doing two-factor authentication natively, so for email confirmation at least. So we went back and we built that in, and we saw a lot of login loops drop that way. But getting more into the technical challenges of it, if everyone's ready to learn a little bit of RxJava and Kotlin in a few seconds, I'm just going to run through it. But the important thing to note here is that we use a very vanilla like model view presenter setup. The RxJava, we use like an observable interface to observe data on our model, on our models, and it doesn't really matter where they're coming from. The important part is that they're there. But that means that we have a lot of contracts that look like this, where you have a presenter interface and a view interface, and you can interact with the view from the presenter and unit test the view that way. It's very vanilla. There's like 1.5 million articles about it. I won't go too much into it, but that means that we had a lot of slides that, or we had a lot of presenters that look like this. We subscribe to a service, and on Next, where we're getting Next events, we were doing a lot of work essentially in our on Next events, and we were checking a lot of state for each event, and it was very brittle code. It's not deterministic. It doesn't really hold up to stability that well, and it's really hard to reason about because you would have these huge if-else statements sort of checking like, does this workspace exist? Is it multi-factor required? Does the user have multiple? Does the user have one? Are they on an enterprise org? Are they on a paid team? So around this time, we were sort of adopting Kotlin, And we tried to, we saw that we could embrace sealed classes to really help out our observable chains. And so if you're not familiar, sealed classes are like a way of modeling like restricted type hierarchies. They're a lot like enums, but they can contain state, and you can have multiple instances of them. So I had been reading about something called the model view intent pattern, which I thought was amazing and is essentially trying to model like Redux in Android, but it's like pretty untenable for a legacy app because there's a lot of refactoring and boilerplate. But one thing it did do was emit these sort of result events that you could when on the instance type and then have like very clean view interactions. So we kind of put those to work, and now we can map to the right result or the right instance, and now our subscribers are really neat and clean, and they're very, very easy to read about because we're basically using like human readable English here in our subscribers when we're looking for our next events. And then the other thing is the way that we handled errors. Errors are super important in a login platform because essentially, usually, you're going to request the service to log you in, and then you're going to get back an error that says, oh, this user has multi-factor auth required, or they have two-factor auth required, or they have SSO enabled. So we do a lot of error handling, but error handling that is important for the user, right? We want to show more things to the user because of an error. We don't want to just log an error, and this is why this code is also pretty brittle because this error could be anything, and you see that we're casting it to an API error here, but we're sort of treating all these errors like they should be API errors, and they really could be anything. They could be a null pointer in your stream if you're using RX2. They could be an indexed out of bounds exception. It could be anything. So what we wanted to do is sort of pick out the pieces of our stream errors that were API errors and return them to the view as actual event results. And we saw a lot of wins this way, and it made things a lot cleaner. And that was basically really it. And the reason why it all matters is things like this. I like to read this like I just love the login experience, but it's probably not so much that. But the point is that Slack, we like to be competitor aware and customer obsessed, and that's something that we repeat a lot. That's sort of our mantra. We're always focused on trying to make things better for the customer, and good enough is never great. Small amounts of friction always end up creating really, really bad experiences. And so I guess my diatribe is the customer is always right. So, and that's really it. There you go.
So we got time for some questions from the audience. If anybody has a question they'd like to ask Sam at all. Any questions? We got one over here.
Do you have any advice for people that are refactoring legacy applications, especially for the really big ones that aren't following any types of patterns that you have in there that you're describing?
Well, it depends. Like, if you're following like no pattern, it's going to be hard. You're probably going to end up, with these God activities. My advice is to always if you want something super simple, like MVP is great. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. If I were to do an app from scratch, or if I were to refactor, if I had my way, I would probably do it the way that the Google Architecture Guide does it, which is sort of like a modified MVVM with live data and view models. But I've looked pretty extensively into view models, and I really like what they do in terms of you not having to hold a reference to subscriptions or lifecycle events. So I think, it really depends what you want to do. If you're not following any pattern, then, I don't know. I'm not sure what your use case is.
Cool. Do we have any other questions from the audience over here?
Hi, Moni. I just have one question. I saw you have a lot of situation in the on Next and on Arrow. Mm-hmm. What if in the future we have to add a new login source like the Facebook source or Facebook login or Google login?
Sure.
So we need to add a new case in this way.
Sure.
So
yeah.
How do you handle this?
So we actually went through this. What we did was create a multicasted observable in our presenter. So you have essentially like a login service that you're passing a flag to depending on the source, and then multicasting it. And then you can handle those as separate streams. The other way that we went about it is creating two separate observables and merging them together, and then having them all return the same type. So you could have them all return like this like parent type of success, and then you can actually nest sealed classes. So you could have like success.Facebook login, success.SSO login, success.blah, blah, blah, right? And then you just when on the instance type in your view and route to the right view in that respect.
Got another question over here.
Sure thing.
Hey, thanks for a great talk.
Thanks.
Could you speak a little bit more about testing? Like, what kinds of tests do you have around the login experience?
Absolutely. We have, obviously, for our simple cases, vanilla unit tests for our presenters. We also have extensive instrumented tests as well. And then we have a end-to-end test suite that sort of runs with real data. Can we log in? Can we log in standard? And we have also as well like performance regression testing. What we're working on is trying to basically stub out third-party identity providers like SSO providers. This is a problem that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I'm still not quite there. Being able to stub those out in testing is like one of the things that like bugs me pretty much every single day. So I don't have a good answer for that yet, but we're thinking about it. We're working on it.
Yeah, how many people do you have working on this single login feature?
Just me and one other guy.
Okay, thanks.
You mentioned customer obsessed. So how exactly did you involve the customers in your testing?
So after our first go round, we did a lot of research on. We get a lot of tweets. We get a lot of customer experience tickets coming in, and then we also did extensive rounds of customer research. We just rolled this out now, this like new experience now, the workspace picker, because we were user researching, user testing it for so long. So we have an amazing customer experience and user research team, and that was really how we involved them. The other thing is that we use data. We use a lot of data. We love data at Slack. That number I pointed to, 1% or 80% of users have one workspace, one login. We picked that as a North Star, as our second hypothesis, right? Where like, if we optimize for this best case, for this major case, then we're going to make a lot of people happy.
Cool. Any last questions? We still have a few minutes if anybody has one. Sure.
This is great. You guys are. I've never had this many questions. Nobody really cares about sign-in.
Hi, that was a great talk.
Thank you.
If you could change one thing in your login architecture, what would that be?
That's a good question. I think I mentioned this. I became really obsessed with like how we manage state. The way that our architecture now is MVP. I think that like if I could like really do it over, I would do it in sort of like a cycle.js Redux kind of pattern with like you have this state object that you reduce all of your state down into and have your view just sort of render that. So you have like one input and one output from your like activity or fragment or whatever. So you sort of reduce everything down into those two outputs. I think that would be probably the thing I would change the most. It's really difficult to have such a legacy app with so many people working on it to propose huge architectural changes like that, especially when their benefit is really for like mostly me and not them. So I would definitely explore like better, even like MVVM would be better. I think what happens with MVP is you end up like messing with like, you end up reaching outside of your reactive streams a lot to like mess with the view, and that gives you like these very like impure side effects. And we see a lot of bugs that like I know are attributed to that, but like people don't really believe that they're attributed to that. So yeah, that would be probably how I would get rid of. I would also use view models, and I would get rid of like attaching and detaching like because of lifecycle events. Like don't want to deal with the lifecycle. I don't know why we push lifecycle into our presenters. It's really dumb, but.
So do you use like model view intent in your sign-in process?
No.
MVP.
We MVP, yep.
But like your app is, as you say, it's a legacy app. Like some other developers are also working on other part of the app. So like, do they use other architecture? Like, or like is it common architecture for whole app?
Yeah, I guess it was a year and a half ago we switched to MVP. So I would say all new features are written in this new MVP. The issue with MVP is that it's kind of broken. So every time we do a new feature, you sort of have to adapt MVP to it in terms of like, oh, this feature has multiple screens, like this feature has XYZ that like needs your MVP to sort of be like molded around. We don't have like a set way of like each feature is built this way every time. But a good portion of our app is still like in our legacy God activity kind of architecture.
Thanks for talk. What instruments do you use for end-to-end tests?
Oh, sorry. We use the robot pattern, which I think Jake Wharton presented on a while ago, and Kotlin and the robot pattern to create those tests. And then the instrumentation we use is Espresso. Yeah, we have one of the Espresso founders or original writers on our team who's given amazing talks on writing end-to-end tests and performance tests. So if you're interested, his name is Valera, and he's got some great talks out there. So highly recommended.
Yeah, because you mentioned Espresso, I was wondering, have you ever tried to build on top of Espresso with some behavior-driven things like Cucumber or something like that?
No, we have a really vanilla setup. We're sort of adverse to making things more complicated than they need to be. At the same time, we're sort of adverse to like anything. It takes a lot of buy-in to get like something like that through. So, but in a good way, where like we keep things really stable and it's really easy to get set up as a new developer.
Cool. I think we'll end on that note. One more round of applause, please, for Sam.